All right, everybody. Thank you for coming today. And my name is Beth Holtwick, and I'm going to be covering the topic of Melchizedek today, and also covering a pattern that I found in the Bible. I call it the pattern of freedom. That was actually based on my study of Melchizedek, and it's an awesome study. It's just awesome. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and it was kind of unexpected. I wasn't actually expecting to discover this, but that's typically how God works, at least in my life. So I hope you all will enjoy this. It is going to be a two-part series because it is a fairly long teaching, and so I'm going to break it up in two parts. So today we're going to focus on the Melchizedek part as first. So hopefully on the screen next to you, you should be able to see my slideshow. And just an overview for today's study. As I mentioned, I love studying patterns in the Bible. They are all over the place, and it's a way to learn what God is trying to teach us. And as I mentioned, so I started studying out Melchizedek, and which I really thought was only going to take a few minutes because there's only 11 verses in the entire Bible that mention Melchizedek. And so I didn't think it was going to be that long of a study, but much to my surprise, there was a lot of information in it. So the goal for our study today is to explain the Melchizedek priesthood. And like I said, next time, the next series, I'll explain a pattern that we find behind the Melchizedek priesthood. And I want to be able to explain what this information means to us today. It was a fairly lengthy study that I did, and so it was kind of hard to pick out everything to include. So many of the really nitty-gritty details have been left out. If you are just really interested, I'll be happy to send you that information. Just get with us after the presentation. A few additional points before we're getting into the study. I use some abbreviations. So if you see the letters MP, that stands for Melchizedek priesthood. If you see the abbreviation BOL, that stands for the Book of the Law. This is the same thing as the Mosaic Law. It was the law that was received by Moses on Mount Sinai. So if you hear me talking about the Book of the Law, that's what I'm referring to. OT means Old Testament. NT means New Testament. I'm also going to be referring to the Aaronic priesthood from Aaron, the priest Aaron. So Aaronic priesthood is exactly the same priesthood as the Levitical priesthood. This was the priesthood that was in the Old Testament. These are the priests that actually performed the animal sacrifices in the tabernacle and also the temple of God. So just know that when I mention Aaronic priesthood, I'm going to refer to the Aaronic priesthood. It is the actual Levitical priesthood that is also mentioned in your Bible. It's the same thing. And if you do have questions as we go through this, just raise your hand. Laura is going to try her best to kind of watch that because I get very busy in my talking, and I'll try to catch her attention. So Laura, you might have to wave your hand or something to catch my attention as I'm talking. Hopefully I won't lose you along the way. Okay, so let's get started. Who or what is Melchizedek? In Hebrews chapter 5, 9, and 10, it says, "And once made perfect, he," this is Jesus, "became the source of eternal salvation for all who obey him, and was designated by God to be high priest in the order of Melchizedek." So the book of Hebrews is actually proclaiming Jesus as our high priest in this order of Melchizedek. So what is this order of Melchizedek? Well, in the Old Testament, the term Melchizedek is first used in Genesis, and it's Genesis 14:18. And it says, "Then Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was the priest of God Most High." So there's four very important things that we can discover in this particular verse. First, it's very important to note that this event or this verse takes place in the book of Genesis. This book is before the time of Aaron. Aaron actually doesn't show up until the book of Exodus. So if you're not very familiar with the Old Testament, the book of Genesis is the first book, and the second book is the book of Exodus. So Melchizedek actually shows up in Genesis before the time of Aaron. Aaron wasn't even born yet at this point. So that's kind of the first thing we need to take note of. Secondly, and I'm just leaving the verse up there at the top so you can keep looking at it, and I'm highlighting what I'm trying to talk about in red. So here we see that Melchizedek was a priest of God. Thus, we can conclude that there was actual priesthood before Aaron even came onto the scene. And the Melchizedek priesthood was God's original priesthood. This was plan A, okay? So this was the first priesthood out there. The Aaronic priesthood came during the time of Aaron and Moses, and that didn't show up until the book of Exodus. So Melchizedek was not an Aaronic priest. Obviously, he came before Aaron. So in contrast, the book of the law, the Mosaic law, teaches that the priestly line has to come from the order of Aaron, meaning all the priests had to be a physical descendant of Aaron. This line was passed down father to son. A couple of verses that back this up. It says Exodus 28, verse 1. Then bring near to you Aaron, your brother, and his sons with him, from among the people of Israel, to serve me as priests. Aaron and Aaron's sons, Nadab and Abihu, Eleazar and Ithamar. Also in Numbers 3, verse 10, it says, appoint Aaron and his sons to serve as priests. Anyone else who approaches the sanctuary is to be put to death. So I just want to really make sure you understand that if you were not a descendant of Aaron, you could not be a priest. It's not something you could apply for. It wasn't an option. And if you tried to pretend to be a priest and you got near the sanctuary, you actually would be put to death. So this was serious business. These were the people who were appointed by God to serve him as priest during this time. Okay, so let's go back to the order of Melchizedek. And we read in Genesis 14 that Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was a priest of God Most High. So this third point is the term Melchi in Hebrew means king, and Zedek means righteous. Thus, the term Melchizedek means righteous king. It is very likely that Melchizedek actually is a title, not a person's name. And it's very possible that this title was given to several people, those that made up the order of Melchizedek. Remember we talked about, or at least actually, maybe I haven't mentioned it yet, the order of Aaron. That was Aaron and his sons and his grandsons and his great-grandsons. These are a descendant of line. So if Melchizedek is a title and there's an order of Melchizedek, that means Melchizedek and his line of descendants. Hopefully that makes sense. All right. So the last point in this particular verse in Genesis is that Melchizedek is a combination of both priest and king. This is very much unlike the Aaronic priesthood. You could not serve as priest and also be a king. It was basically one or another. But here we see in the Melchizedek priesthood, it was actually a combination of priest and king. So during the time of the Aaronic priesthood, priests could not serve as kings and kings could not serve as priests. And I'm going to give you an example here in 1 Samuel chapter 13, verses 8 through 14. We're talking about King Saul here. So King Saul, waited 7 days, the time appointed by Samuel. Samuel was a prophet and also a priest during this time. But Samuel did not come to Gilgal, and the people were scattering from him. So Saul said, bring the burnt offering here to me and the peace offerings. And he offered the burnt offering. As soon as he had finished offering the burnt offering, behold, Samuel came. And Saul went out to meet him and greet him. Samuel said, what have you done? And Saul said, when I saw that the people were scattering from me and that you did not come within the days appointed and that the Philistines had mustered at Michmash, I said, now the Philistines will come down against me at Gilgal and I have not sought the favor of the Lord. So I forced myself and offered the burnt offering. And Samuel said to Saul, you have done foolishly. You have not kept the command of the Lord your God, which he had commanded you. For then the Lord would have established your kingdom over Israel forever. But now your kingdom shall not continue. So here we see King Saul actually performing the duties of the priest. And he got in trouble for it. As a matter of fact, the kingdom was taken away from him because of this particular disobedience or breaking that command. Okay, the priestly order of Melchizedek. Now that we know that Melchizedek, 1, existed before the Aaronic priesthood, 2, it was a title, not necessarily somebody's name, and 3, the office of Melchizedek was a combination of the priest and king, the phrase order of Melchizedek implies that there is also a physical line of priests under Melchizedek in the time of Abraham. This is all in the book of Genesis. So let's see this at this point. Let's see if we can figure out who were the Melchizedek priests during this time. So our first clue that we're going to start off with is Noah. Noah was a preacher of righteousness. In 2 Peter 2:5, it says, and spared not the old world, but saved Noah, the 8th person, a preacher of righteousness, bringing in the flood upon the world of the ungodly. So logically thinking here, we've got after the flood, we have Noah is the oldest man on the earth, right? He and his family were the only survivors, the 8 people. Noah was the father, so he's going to be the oldest. So Noah was the oldest man on earth. He was also the head of his family, the only family on earth. And technically, Noah was then the king and the preacher of righteousness. So you see this where he's a king and he's a preacher. He's the oldest guy on earth and he's the head of his household and he's a preacher. So that's a good clue that Noah was a Melchizedek priest. Going further in our investigation into Noah, Noah is just a good example of how you can really go into some digging into the Melchizedek priesthood. Going back to 2 Peter 2:5, it says, and spared not the old world, but saved Noah, the 8th person, a preacher of righteousness. So many believe that this quote, 8th person refers to the 8 people on the ark. And some translations even say, quote, with 7 others, meaning Noah, the 8th person, and 7 others. But the actual wording, if you go back into the Hebrew, the actual wording says, it saved Noah, the 8th preacher of righteousness. Is 2 Peter 2:5 suggesting Noah is the 8th generation from Adam? Or maybe that the 8th Melchizedek priest from Adam? These are questions, and this is kind of how I do my study. I start questioning things like this. So looking at Noah's genealogy, which is found in Genesis 5, we're actually going to look at this to see if Noah was maybe the 8th generation from Adam. So we start out with Adam. In part 1, it says, and Adam lived 130 years and begot a son in his own likeness and after his image and called his name Seth. I do want you to notice right here that it doesn't mention Cain. That's a whole nother story. But we all know that Adam did have many children, including Seth and Cain. But Cain's not mentioned in this genealogy. It's only Seth. Number 2, it says, and Seth lived for 105 years and begot Enos. Once again, Seth actually had more children. Right there in Genesis 5:7, it says he did. But it only mentions, or this genealogy only mentions Enos. So I really want you to understand that the genealogy here is not to explain the entire genealogy tree of Adam's family and how it's grown, but it's pointing out a specific genealogy line that goes up through the tree. Does that make sense? I'm not talking about all the sons and daughters that are born. It's really focusing on a certain genealogical line. So father, son, father, son, father, son, as we're going up this tree. So Adam gave birth to Seth. Seth gave birth to Enos. Number 3, Enos lived 90 years and begot Canaan. Again, Enos had other children, but we're only focusing on this one line. So Canaan. Canaan begot Mahalalel. Mahalalel begot Jared. Jared begot Enoch. Enoch begot Methuselah. Methuselah begot Lamech. Lamech begot Noah. And Noah was 500 years old. Noah begat Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Those are the ones that jumped on the ark with Noah. I didn't go into all their ages. You can read it if you want to come back and look at it. But that's basically the genealogical tree, or the one branch that God wants you to focus on when you're looking at these genealogies. And he's doing this for a purpose. Just got to keep studying out. Okay, so we find, based on our genealogical tree, that Noah was actually the 10th in the genealogy listed in Genesis 5. And I'm going to bounce back here. You'll see down there at the bottom, number 10. So Noah's number 10, but yet we still got to figure out what this 8 means. So how could Noah be the 8th preacher of righteousness according to this genealogy? Well, this requires us to do a little more research. So this got me thinking, what if the position of Melchizedek wasn't passed on until the previous Melchizedek died? So basically, if I'm the father and I have a son, the son wouldn't become the Melchizedek priest until I passed away. Basically, I'm the high priest, and there can only be one high priest at a time. And this is basically what the Aaronic priesthood does at the same thing. The high priest position doesn't get passed down to the son until the high priest dies. And you can read about that when Aaron, his son didn't become high priest until Aaron passed away. So does this change our genealogical line? Well, let's go back and do a little more looking. So number 1, Adam would have been the first Melchizedek. When Adam died, Seth was the next in line to be Melchizedek. When Seth died, we had Enos. Then we have Enos dying. It was Canaan that took his place. When Canaan died, Mahalalel took his place. When Mahalalel died, Jared took that role. And when Jared died, Methuselah became Melchizedek. All right. So I'm going to hold on a second, because Jared's son actually was Enoch. So why wouldn't he be included in that Melchizedek priesthood line? It's because Jared was still alive when Enoch was taken up. That was in Genesis 5:24. So basically, by the time Jared died, Enoch was gone. So it immediately went down to his grandson, which was Methuselah. So we now have officially skipped one generation in the line of succession. Does that all make sense? Does everybody nod your head? Okay. If not, remember to raise your hand. Okay, so when Jared died, Methuselah, the grandson, became Melchizedek. And then when Methuselah died, here we go again. Methuselah's son is Lamech, and he actually died before Methuselah did. So we're going to check out the timing in Genesis 5. It's at the top there. Genesis 5, it says, and Methuselah lived 187 years when he begot Lamech. And all the days of Methuselah were 969 years, and he died. And Lamech lived 182 when he begot his son Noah. And Lamech lived, after he begot Noah, 595 years. So Lamech was 182 years old when Noah was born, and he lived another 595 years after that. So Lamech lived a total of 777 years. That's a pretty cool number, actually, by the way, if you like numbers in the Bible. Methuselah was 187 years old when Lamech was born. So Lamech lived 777 years, plus the 187 years that Methuselah was alive when Lamech was born. That would make Methuselah 964 years old when Lamech died. Well, we just read that Methuselah lived to be 969 years. So basically, Methuselah lives 5 years longer than Lamech. So again, we've just actually taken one more person out of the genealogical line. So when you remove Enoch and Lamech from the genealogical line, Noah ends up being the 8th preacher of righteousness. Is that not totally cool? Hallelujah for that. That's amazing. I just thought that was the coolest thing. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to lay out the supposed Melchizedek priesthood for you. So here's our Melchizedek order so far. So it starts with Adam, goes through Seth, Enos, Canaan, Mahalalel, Jared, Methuselah, and Noah being the 8th preacher of righteousness. Okay, so my second clue was Shem. In Jasher 16, the book of Jasher, if you're not familiar with it, it's actually one of the apocryphal books. And some people think, that's scripture. Other people say, nope, that's not scripture. But doesn't really matter. What is really important is that Jasher in chapter 16 basically parallels the story that we read in Genesis 14 about Melchizedek coming to see Abraham. Same story. The wording in Jasher is just a little bit different, but it actually gives us a clue. So I'm going to read it here. It says, and Adonai Zedek, Adonai is actually the Hebrew term for king as well. So Adonai Zedek, king of Jerusalem, the same was Shem, went out with his men to meet Abram and his people with bread and wine, and they remained together in the valley of Melech. Okay, so I'm pointing out the fact that Shem, according to the book of Jasher, was Melchizedek. He was Adonai Zedek. He was the king of Jerusalem at that time, was Shem. So we have added to our Melchizedek order. Shem would have been number 9. In the blue there, it says, it is important to note that the Melchizedek priesthood is being passed down father to son or father to grandson in some cases, but it's basically a genealogical descending line. They're all related. Okay, everybody still following me? Hope so. Okay, so as I studied further into the priestly line of Melchizedek, I searched for key terms that pointed to those who served in this kingly priestly role. Obviously, the remaining main people in the book of Genesis were candidates for being in the Melchizedek priesthood, and this would include Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and of course, Jacob's 12 sons. And all of these folks would follow in that father-son passage in the genealogical line. So in looking for key terms, I was trying to kind of just verify that these folks actually were in the Melchizedek priesthood. I found these following traits that seem to be fairly common as you look at these folks. And there are some folks, by the way, there are some people in the genealogical line that we don't really have any information on, like Enos. I don't have any information. It just says it was his son. We just pretty much know he's in the line because Noah being the 8th preacher of righteousness, it just ties in well. So we know he was most likely a Melchizedek priesthood. But anyway, these are some other traits that I've made out. It's a list of key terms. For example, being called righteous. Noah was called righteous, and that was done in Genesis 6:9. And I'm not going to read all the addresses. You can see them right there. But Noah also walked faithfully with God and was blameless. Noah obeyed God. He built an altar to God. He was blessed by God. He was called to be fruitful. God established a covenant with Noah. Noah blessed the next Melchizedek priest, which would have been Shem. Shem actually brought bread to others, and Shem actually received tithes. So just looking at our two basically proven Melchizedek priests, Noah and Shem, these were some key terms that I just made a list of. And I was kind of curious if I would find any of these key terms elsewhere in the Old Testament that would indicate, for example, that maybe Abraham was a Melchizedek priest. So let's take a look. Let's look at Abraham. So without going into a huge genealogical study, it should be noted that Abraham actually is a descendant of Shem. So I can't give you that line right off the bat, but just know that he is a descendant of Shem, thus passing the Melchizedek priesthood to Abraham would still follow that father-son path. More clues on Abraham was looking at these key terms, whether he was a Melchizedek priest. So Abraham was blessed by God. He obeyed God. He built altars to God. He was called to be fruitful by God. He received blessings from Shem, who was the previous Melchizedek priest. He was counted as righteous. God established a covenant with Abraham, and Abraham walked faithfully with God and was called blameless. And we even find Abraham serving bread. So, wow, those are some cool patterns that are being repeated here. Another clue about Abraham, it's important to note that a few more of the key terms that I added to my list regarded the covenant that Abraham received from God, and this was in Genesis 17. Those who receive this covenant are in the Melchizedek priesthood. So two key terms in this covenant is actually the promise of the inheritance of the land. They were promised that. And they were also promised to be fruitful. So I added these two terms to my key terms list. So here is our Melchizedek order so far. 1 through 10, we've added the last two, Shem and Abraham, to our list. Let's look at Isaac now. So most of us know that Isaac was the promised son. God promised the son to Abraham. This in itself is a huge clue that Isaac is going to be the next Melchizedek priest. So Isaac received the promise of the land and the descendants. He was blessed by God. He obeyed God. He built altars to God. He walked faithfully to God. He was called to be fruitful, and God established a covenant with him. So Isaac is going to be added to our Melchizedek priesthood line. Number 11. All right, Jacob. Jacob was the son of Isaac. Jacob also received the promise of the land and the descendants. He was blessed by God. He obeyed God. He built altars to God. He was called to be fruitful. He received the blessing from Isaac. God established covenant with him, and Jacob even served bread. So I know I sound like I'm kind of repeating myself, but one thing I'm not talking about are the other sons that did not get these things. So, for example, Abraham gave birth to he didn't give birth, but his son was Isaac and Ishmael. Ishmael didn't have these promises. He wasn't blessed by God. We don't read anything about him being obeyed. So as I was studying these out, I was comparing Jacob and Esau, which of the two received these blessings by God. So there's always this comparison. You got to decide which one was the Melchizedek priest. And these key terms really helped me determine which ones were. Although you kind of know when you study these things out who the one that followed God and who was the one that didn't necessarily. Okay, so we added Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob to our Melchizedek priest. That's kind of a no-brainer because they're considered the forefathers of the faith. I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So, even God refers to himself that way. So, like I said, it's kind of a no-brainer. All right, so Jacob, going back here. So number 12 is Jacob. And it just so happens that being number 12, he also had 12 sons, which I think is kind of fun. But all of a sudden, I had 12 guys I got to look at and decide out of the 12 which one fit the Melchizedek priesthood the best. And really, it kind of was a no-brainer again. It became really obvious that it was Joseph. Joseph received the promise of the land and the descendants. He was blessed by God. He was called to be fruitful. He received the blessing from Jacob. He served bread, and Joseph served bread on a huge level. He served bread to Egypt, and he also set up a tithing system for the Egyptians when they were preparing for the 7-year famine. That's the word I was looking for. Famine, which is fascinating because they're like, the people of Egypt were saying, man, you saved us. You've saved us, all glory to your God. So it's fascinating. I mean, he did it on a large scale compared to Shem, who served bread to Abraham and his family. Okay, another fun clue about Joseph is at the end of Joseph's life, or I'm sorry, at the end of Jacob's life. So at that point, Jacob is actually sitting down and he's blessing all 12 sons. And at the end of his blessing of Joseph, Jacob says the following: the blessings of your father have excelled the blessings of my ancestors up to the utmost bound of the everlasting hills. They shall be on the head of Joseph, a crown on his head, who is separate, meaning consecrated, from his brothers. So I truly believe Joseph was the next Melchizedek priest. He was being separated out. Consecrated means to be set apart from his other 11 brothers. And so, again, that would prove to me that Joseph was the next Melchizedek priest. So here we are. Joseph is number 13 on our list. Okay, so as we see, we've got Adam here, number 1, and Joseph is number 13. So from Adam to Joseph, okay? The Melchizedek priesthood between Adam and Joseph. Basically, the book of Genesis starts with Adam and ends with the stories of Joseph. We find a detailed genealogy of the Melchizedek priesthood being passed down from fathers to son. And this is exactly how the Aaronic priesthood was set up as well in the book of Exodus. But that doesn't exist yet. We're just talking about Genesis. Exodus hasn't arrived yet on the scene. But there's more to this. So once the Israelites moved to Goshen, now I'm going to give you a quick little background. Joseph was thrown in the pit by his brothers. They sold him into slavery in Egypt. Joseph goes to Egypt. He serves time in prison. He ends up getting out. He really ends up being second in charge under Pharaoh. I mean, it's an amazing story of success. But the 11 brothers actually find Joseph in Egypt by accident, really. And they end up being reconciled, and they go back and they get their dad, Jacob, and they bring him to Egypt with them. So the whole family now is leaving Canaan, the promised land, technically, but they are leaving that. They're going over to Egypt, and they live in a place called Goshen. So I wanted to make sure you guys knew where we were in the Bible. So once all the Israelites, Jacob and his family left Canaan and came to Egypt, they lived in Goshen. And this happens in Genesis 47, where we're going to read about this, where it says, now the Israelites settled in Egypt in the region of Goshen. They acquired property there and were fruitful and increased greatly in number. Well, here we see this fruitfulness spreading to all 12 tribes. It's not just the family of Joseph, which caught my mind. It caught my eye because it's like, wow, now everybody's being fruitful. This is wonderful. God's letting them all be fruitful. But that's not all. Right before Joseph dies, we find that he's talking to his brothers. So in Genesis 50, verse 24, Joseph said to his brethren, I am dying, but God will surely visit you and bring you out of this land to the land of which he swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So right here, Joseph is actually giving the promise of the land to all his brothers, not just to Joseph's 2 sons. All of a sudden, all 12 tribes have now inherited the land. So they're fruitful and they're inheriting the land. Something actually has really changed at this point. It's really exciting. I was like, wow, my jaw was hitting the ground like, wow, check it out. So all 12 tribes have received the promises given to Abraham. They're going to be fruitful. They received the promised land. And in a sense, they are all being called to be Melchizedek priests. But then something else happens. The Melchizedek priesthood seems to disappear. And the 12 tribes go into Egyptian slavery. And I was like, wow, okay. So I was searching, I was trying to find the Melchizedek priesthood at this point, and it just disappears. Everything kind of seems to just disappear for a couple hundred years. So what's just happened here? What I found is that there's this large gap in time. We're talking like 200 to 400 years when God is silent. And this is the time between Joseph and Moses. This is the time between the book of Genesis and the book of Exodus. You're not hearing anything from God. You're not seeing anything about genealogies. That's what's missing in this gap. We're missing genealogies. There's no more stories. So up until this point, God has been so careful to line out the genealogies for us so that we can track the priestly order of Melchizedek. But then the genealogies just stopped. It wasn't until like 800 years later, when First Chronicles chapters 6 and 7 were written, that we find out what the genealogies of the 12 tribes were between the time of Joseph and Moses. So, why does God wait 800 years to give us this information in his word? It's just made me question. Well, maybe it was because God wanted us to notice that the Melchizedek priesthood was being put on hold. Just something to think about. Just all the genealogies just really kind of dropped, and the stories dropped, and we don't hear from God for about at least 200 years. I know there's arguments about how long that time really was, but we're just going to say 200 years to be conservative. It could have been up to 400 years. Okay, so I'm now going to take you on a rabbit trail for a quick second. Have you ever noticed a really weird sentence in the middle of a Bible story that just really seemed out of place? I mean, you're just reading along, everything's making sense, and all of a sudden there's a sentence there that's like, what does that have anything to do with what I just read? It's just stuck in there. I mean, I come across these every once in a while. Well, what I have discovered is that that's the secret treasure that is, or it's like a little secret nugget that's being placed in there, and it's in there for a reason. God does everything for a reason. Every word in that Bible is placed there for a reason. So when you come across a sentence like this, take special note and do a little study on that. Okay, so I'm going to give you an example. So I found this weird sentence in the story of Jacob blessing Joseph's sons. That's Ephraim and Manasseh. And it's the last sentence here in red, but I'm going to read you a little bit of the context so you can see what's going on. And it's in Genesis 48. And you know what? That's probably more like verses 3 through 7. I added to it, so I just had verse 7, but I think it's like 3 through 7. Okay, so it says, Jacob said to Joseph, God Almighty appeared to me at Luz in the land of Canaan, and there he blessed me and said to me, I am going to make you fruitful and increase your numbers. I will make you a community of peoples, and I will give this land as an everlasting possession to your descendants after you. Now then, your 2 sons born to you in Egypt. So this is Jacob talking to Joseph, Joseph's sons. So now then, your 2 sons, Joseph, born to you in Egypt before I came to you here, will be reckoned as mine. Ephraim and Manasseh will be mine, just as Reuben and Simeon are. Any children born to you after them will be yours. In the territory they inherit, they will be reckoned under the names of their brothers. But as for me, when I came from Padam, Rachel died by me in the land of Canaan in the way, when yet there was but a little way to come unto Ephrath, and I buried her there in the way to Ephrath, the same as Bethlehem. Okay, so I don't know about you, but that last sentence, because then he goes on to bless each of the children, Ephraim and Manasseh, and it's the cross-handed blessing. I don't know if you remember that part of the story, but this sentence is just stuck in the middle of this story, and it doesn't really tie in with the rest of it. I mean, I guess it's good information, but what is he talking about? Why did he jump there? This got me thinking. So I'm going to show you a technique that I do. Some people might think I'm crazy, but it was pretty interesting. So what I do is I go into the Strong's Concordance and I start breaking down the verse. I'll look at the words and see what they actually mean. Because some words in the Bible are translated one way, but if you actually look at the definition, they could be translated another way. So in the black is the original verse, and in the red is actually the different meanings of that particular word. So it says, and as for me, when I came, so the word came could also be translated as go, enter, come in, attain to, lead in, to be brought in. So you can kind of see what I'm saying. So from Padam actually means the field. Rachel, her name, is actually translated as sheep or defined as sheep. Died basically means the same, died prematurely, perished, to be put to death. By me in the land, land can be land or earth of Canaan. Canaan actually means lowland, depressed land. In the way, way can mean direction, path, course of life. When yet can also mean still, yet again. There was a little actually is, the word there means distance. And way means land and earth. So little way means distant land. To come, and we've already went through come, unto Ephrath. Ephrath means ash heap, place of fruitfulness. Okay, fruitfulness, key term. That's a word that caught my eye. And I buried her there in the way of Ephrath, again, ash heap or place of fruitfulness. The same is Bethlehem, house of bread. Okay, bread and fruitfulness. Those are two terms that caught my eye. And that's probably why I looked at those two terms and I thought, you know what, I'm going to do this whole sentence and break it out. So if you actually do what I just did and then you start rewriting it, you're going to come up with something very interesting. So after breaking down the verse, this is what, after writing out and taking out all the red, it says, this is Jacob talking. I have been brought into the field, but the sheep will perish in the depressed land on their journey. Still, there is a distant land to attain to, a place of fruitfulness, but it will be buried. The path to the place of fruitfulness, the house of bread. So the last few terms, the place of fruitfulness, the house of bread, are two key Melchizedek terms, yet it says the path to these two things will be buried. Okay, I'm just going to reiterate. We've got Jacob left the land of Canaan, he and his family, and they all went to Egypt. And Jacob is telling his son Joseph that Jacob was brought into the field, God's field, but the sheep, the rest of the Israelites, are going to perish in the depressed land on their journey. They're going to perish in Egypt. They went into slavery. Still, Jacob is telling Joseph, still there is a distant land to attain to, a place of fruitfulness back over there. There's a distant place to attain to. But right now, that path to that distant place is buried. The path to the place of fruitfulness, the path to the house of bread, is going to be hidden for a while. It's a hidden prophecy, you know, and actually maybe this is exactly what Jacob told Joseph. It's just been translated differently for us. I mean, and it's not necessarily mean it's wrong. It's just there's mysteries that God puts in his word. And this was just really interesting. So this could actually be a second witness that the Melchizedek priesthood, the path to the place of fruitfulness, is being put on hold. It's going to be buried for a while. You're not going to see it. Am I losing anybody yet? No, hopefully not. Okay, so the time between Joseph and Moses, Joseph was the last part of Genesis and Moses is the beginning of Exodus. So the time period, you know, that gap of time between Joseph and Moses was actually a transition time from freedom into slavery. The people went from freedom into slavery to Egypt for the Israelites. At this point, when they go into slavery, there is no proof that there was a Melchizedek king and priest existing at that point. And honestly, slaves don't typically get to have their own king. Pharaoh was king at that point, king of Egypt. We also know that the Israelites were not allowed to honor their God. Pharaoh knows nothing of their God. In Exodus 5, 1 and 2, it says, afterward, Moses and Aaron went in and told Pharaoh, thus says the Lord God of Israel, let my people go that they may hold a feast to me in the wilderness. And Pharaoh said, who is Yahweh? And should I obey his voice and let Israel go? I don't know Yahweh, nor will I let Israel go. The path to the place of fruitfulness and the house of bread truly had been cut off during this time of slavery. Okay, so we're going to start building this pattern. I told you I loved patterns. So we're going to kind of lay this out based on what I read in the book of Genesis. We start out, number one, there's the first Melchizedek priesthood, and that was from Adam to Joseph, and it was passed down father to son. And genealogy played very much a role in this priesthood. Then in part two, or in step two, Abraham actually received a blood ratified covenant with God. And that was where he would receive the promised land and be fruitful. Then we see that the Hebrews go into a physical slavery in Egypt. And then we have the Melchizedek priesthood disappearing, and there's a large gap in time. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're building this first pattern, and then we're going to see if there's a parallel pattern that happens later. So again, the time between Joseph in Genesis and Moses in the book of Exodus is a time of slavery, it's a time of bondage, and it's a time of no hope for the Hebrew people. So the question is God going to save his people? Most of us know that question or that answer. Yes, God sends a redeemer. We turn the page in the Bible to the book of Exodus and we find Moses. So Moses was definitely a redeemer of the people. Remember, he brought them out of Egypt, but was Moses a Melchizedek priest? Yes, he was. Okay, so remember, as a Melchizedek priest, you had to be priest and king, right? So let's look at Moses as a king. So even though we don't see Moses specifically referred to as a king, he was certainly the leader of the Israelites at this time. He led the people for 40 years. He was their mediator between the people and Pharaoh, and also the people and God. He also was a judge for the people. So for all practical purposes, Moses was the king of the Israelites at this point. Moses as a priest. Moses actually taught the people the ways of God. He performed many of the priestly duties before Aaron was even consecrated as high priest. And Moses also consecrated Aaron's sons, and he consecrated the tabernacle. So Moses functioned as a priest all before the Aaronic priesthood was consecrated and served in the order of Aaron. So Moses is the next Melchizedek priest in our list. In Psalm 99:6, it says Moses and Aaron were among his priests. Exodus 24:3-8, Moses sprinkled the book and the people as a blood ratification of the covenant. By the way, these are priestly duties. Exodus 40, verses 22-33, Moses set up the tabernacle. Only the priests were supposed to touch anything in the tabernacle, but Moses is the one that set up the tabernacle. He put the bread on the table, he burnt incense on the altar of incense, and offered a burnt offering and meal offering on the altar of burnt offering. In Leviticus 8, Moses was the one who anointed the tabernacle and all that was in it. He anointed the priests and offered a sin offering, a burnt offering, and an ordination offering for the consecration of the priests. Moses was also not a descendant of Aaron. Moses was actually the brother of Aaron. So based on this, we can surmise that Moses was acting as a Melchizedek priest. Obviously not in the order of Aaron because he was not the son of Aaron. He was the brother. Here's a difference. More importantly, Moses is the path to the place of fruitfulness and the house of bread, coming back to life. So all of a sudden we see the Melchizedek priesthood coming back to life after it disappeared for a little bit. That's pretty cool. Unfortunately, we have a dilemma. So basically, from Adam to Joseph, which is the book of Genesis, the Melchizedek priesthood is passed from father to son. And at the end of Genesis, our last Melchizedek priest is Joseph. And Joseph, being one of the 12 brothers, the 12 tribes, this would be considered the tribe of Joseph, which obviously was broken into two. You got the tribe of Ephraim and tribe of Manasseh. Ephraim and Manasseh were the sons of Joseph, and that's a whole nother story. But so basically, Joseph is the tribe of Joseph. And here we have our next Melchizedek priest is actually Moses. Now, Moses is from the tribe of Levi. So if the priesthood is passed down father to son, how is it that Moses can be in that line? Because it's like our genealogical tree jumps from one tree to our genealogical line jumps from one tree to the next tree. So we're going from the tribe of Joseph to the tribe of Levi. And that wouldn't follow the father son passing it down. Do you see where we're having a little bit of dilemma? Okay, here's what happened. So we remember how we talked about Joseph gave the Abrahamic promises to all 12 tribes. It just wasn't passed to his sons only. This is actually proof that the Melchizedek priesthood was no longer passed down genealogically. It was being spread out to all 12 tribes. Thus, Moses can and has been called into the Melchizedek priesthood. But not only that, but all the Israelites as a nation are being called to be priests as well. And I can prove it right here in Exodus 19, verse 6. This is God speaking. And you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words which you shall speak to the children of Israel. So we have just seen a change in the priesthood. The priesthood used to be very individualized, and now it's being given out to the entire nation of Israel. They were to be a kingdom of priests. They were to be a holy nation. It was growing. It was expanding. It was so cool. So Moses, who wasn't from the tribe of Joseph, is now the king and priest for this holy nation. It's very cool. So a change really has happened. The Melchizedek priesthood has gone from being handed down individually from father to son to be handed down to an entire nation, and that's the nation of Israel. Do we have a second witness? You betcha we do. Exodus 3, verse 7. And God said, I have surely seen the oppression of my people who are in Egypt, and have heard their cry because of their taskmasters, for I know their sorrows. Right here in Exodus 3 is the first time that God refers to the Israelites as my people. A new and improved Melchizedek priesthood has been resurrected after the Israelites had been in slavery. Okay, back to our pattern. We're adding number 5. That's where God sends a redeemer, which was Moses, who brings the people out of a physical slavery in Egypt. And Moses and the Israelites are called to be a new and improved Melchizedek priesthood. Okay, do you see it? That's the beginning. So what we're going to do is we're going to see if history is now going to repeat itself. But you know what? That's going to be continued next week, because I just dumped a lot of information on you, and I think you need to go back and study it out. So that's what we're going to talk about next week. We're going to go back to our pattern here, and we're just going to see if we repeat the pattern, and it is going to be really cool. This is where my jaw drops on this second part. So hope you all liked this part. Like I said, I dropped a lot of information on you, but hopefully some things clicked. So guess we'll take this time for some question and answers. Did I lose anybody? Or did anybody see anything you like?
Well, can we get the images? Do you have that where we can get copies of that? I couldn't write fast enough.
Oh, yes. If you want, yes, I will send you, well, let's see, the PowerPoint. Give me a little bit of time and I will send that to you, Laura, because I assume you don't have PowerPoint. Do you have PowerPoint on your
Not
computer?
that I know of.
Okay, I do have most of this in a Word document, but I tweaked it a little bit before today's presentation, and I just want to make sure that the Word document is updated. So yes, I will be happy to send that to you. And I guess if anybody else would like that that copy, it'll be in a Microsoft Word document, and that way this week you can kind of go through and study some of these verses out. Make sure I'm not lying to you, because that's not my obviously I'm not trying to lie to you, but I don't mind people checking it out and finding out for yourself. So
Eric mentioned on the chat that you could possibly upload it to the Google Drive. Do you know how to do that?
I don't know how to do that.
I don't either. But it's a good idea. I've seen it done.
Yeah, I'm not sure I know how to do it. And again, I still need to put it in a Word document because a lot of people don't have PowerPoint on their computers. I don't think it's in your normal basic Microsoft Office package, but I'll get it in a Word document. So hopefully most of you can access it from there.
Yeah, even if it's a Word document, PowerPoint, we can just upload it directly to something like Google Drive and just set the links to share. Contact me later if you want some quick little help on it.
Okay.
On Zoom. But,
okay. I'll so is that something where you'd like save something to the cloud? Is that basically what you're saying?
Yeah, you just drag and drop it over your drive, and then there's an ability to make a file shareable. That means it's accessible to anybody who has the link, can view the file, and they can copy it.
Without having to have the actual software for the PowerPoint.
Right.
Okay.
Right. If they download it and want to open it on their computer, they probably need software for that, but Google will open it for them.
Okay. I'll ask my husband. He might actually do stuff with the cloud. I don't know if he does. I am familiar with the concept of the cloud, and I'm retired now, but my previous job they did that, but I've never done it here at my house. So I'll have to ask him that, and if not, I'll get it to Laura, and Laura can get it over to you, Eric, if that's okay.
I can the links myself, but I'll talk to you about it. We'll go from there, and we can figure out if you want.
Sounds good.
I'll go ahead and reclaim host, and then you can field Bob's question.
Okay.
At some point in there, wasn't Jacob's name changed to Israel?
Yes. I don't remember it might be like chapter 45 or somewhere in there, but I just referred to him as Jacob in the presentation because I start calling him Israel, and then people get that confused with the nation of Israel. And so it was just easier to keep it as Jacob.
Okay.
But that's kind of an interesting point. If he was Melchizedek priest and that Israel, which is basically the 12 sons, became the 12 tribes. They became known as the 12 tribes. That's what Israel is all their descendants.
Hey, sorry, I joined a little late, but on that last slide, I saw the comment about the Moses and the Israelites being the new and improved Melchizedek priest.
Mm-hmm.
And I think maybe that's not quite accurate. Just something to check on, because Moses is kind of a shadow, right, of Christ, right?
Yes.
And so, it's, he's like the lesser, form of, the Redeemer, the true Redeemer of Christ. But Moses and Aaron, were from the tribe of Levi. They're the Aaronic priesthood. So I think that they're kind of the lesser priesthood, and the Melchizedek is like the original priesthood that was established back with Adam. So
Actually,
just a couple of thoughts that I had for you, so.
yeah. So is this Todd? I'm not seeing you on my screen. I saw a name.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. All right. So Todd, you got most of it. Actually, you must have missed a couple small points. So Moses, you are absolutely correct. He is from the tribe of Levi. And you mentioned that he would be of the Aaronic priesthood. So the problem with that is that the Aaronic priesthood is basically Aaron and his sons and his grandsons and his great-great-grandsons. So they are all descendants of Aaron. The problem is that Moses is actually Aaron's brother. So Moses was not a son of Aaron. He's actually over here. He's beside Aaron. And so Moses, even if he wanted to be, he could not be technically considered an Aaronic priest because he's not a descendant of Aaron. So that's where I actually figured out that Moses served as a Melchizedek priest and Aaron was serving as an Aaronic priest. Moses did many priestly duties, but yet there is no way he technically could have been, according to the law, an Aaronic priest. So when I say it's new and improved priesthood, basically the priesthood that we talked about was the Melchizedek priesthood used to be passed from father, son, father, son. Once it got to Joseph, all of a sudden the promises of the covenant were passed out to all the tribes, to all the Israelites, and they were being called to become Melchizedek priests. And I'm going to go into more of this next week. Something happened and they didn't become Melchizedek priests. They went into slavery instead. Moses brings them out. He's serving as a Melchizedek priest, and it's new and improved Melchizedek priesthood because it's no longer a father-son thing that's passed down. It's been spread out. So we've had a change in the Melchizedek priesthood. You have to understand, I've got my degree in marketing, so I've got to use the term new and improved. It's a marketing thing. I know it's silly, but so I'm saying that it actually has been changed a little bit. The Melchizedek priesthood now, instead of being passed from father to son, is now available to somebody outside that father to son line. Moses otherwise would never be able to serve as any kind of a priest if it hadn't been expanded out to more than just this very distinct line. So you've made some excellent points, and I actually would agree with you completely, except for the fact that Moses could not be an Aaronic priest because he's not in the line under Aaron. He actually is beside Aaron.
What tribe did Moses come out of? Do you know?
Moses was the brother of Aaron, so they are both from the tribe of Levi.
Okay. So you're saying that Moses was a Melchizedek priest?
I believe he was a Melchizedek priest because he couldn't have been under Aaron, as he would actually have to be the son of Aaron in order to be under Aaron in the order of Aaron, if that makes sense. Yeah. Otherwise, it would have been otherwise it should have been called under the order of Levi. If it was called that, which it's not, if it said under the order of Levi, then both Moses and Aaron could have served under the order of Levi. But the Bible actually says it was under the order of Aaron. So they were both priests, though, according to Psalm 99, that God says that both Moses and Aaron served as my priests. It just doesn't say that they were under two different priesthoods, but we can surmise by our study that it actually is two different priesthoods that are going on here. And you're right, the Melchizedek priesthood was the original priesthood. It was the better of the two.
Yep.
It was plan A. But what we're going to
Yep.
find is
Yep.
that there's been some changes and some improvements to the Melchizedek priesthood as we go through time, which is awesome.
Yeah, the only thing I would say is I'm not quite sure that Moses was a Melchizedek priest. If you follow the line from Adam down to Abraham, and then in Matthew, we see the lineage from Abraham all the way to Jesus. You know, that's the line that, you know, doing my study on this Melchizedek priesthood, I use that as that's where, you know, you go from Adam being the first, and then, you know, and again, it was passed down through the death of the previous Melchizedek priest. So that's why you have Noah as the 8th Melchizedek priest, even though there's 10 from Adam to Noah, because Enoch
Can I
was taken
interrupt
up.
you a second? And
Yeah.
you've missed quite a bit of the teaching that you're coming at the end. And I can share with you that there were some key terms. And if you'll listen to the beginning, that Beth goes by multiple things that, for example, that they were righteous, they walked faithfully, they obeyed God. And she gives the scriptures to bullet point every one of those points. And for each Melchizedek priest that she spoke of, she gives these points, which Moses had those points. So I would encourage you just to go ahead and watch that and then come back, because I don't want to repeat everything she said.
Yeah, I think, Todd, once you go through and just listen to the whole recording, you're actually going to agree with basically what I'm saying. And maybe you'll see how Moses could possibly fall into that category. And honestly, you really do need to come back next week, because it's going to explain even more some of the changes that have happened in the Melchizedek priesthood. But I don't want to go into that yet, because that's actually going to be next week that we're going to cover that.
And Bob has a question. Go ahead.
I want to get into the priesthood now. Why couldn't Moses just gone ahead and been a Levitical priest, because he was following the law and he was trusted by God? Why would he have to be why would he have to be a Melchizedek priest?
Actually, so Levitical priest and Aaronic priest are the same thing. So Levitical is just, they're the same exact thing. A Levitical priest had to be from the order of Aaron in order to be a priest. Now there's other Levites that were not priests. And
Right.
although all the Levites actually served the temple in one way or another, some of them actually would carry the tabernacle around. Some were in charge of carrying the actual, the ark and the menorah. Some of them were in charge of music. So all of the Levites served God, but only a small segment of the Levites were actually Aaron and his descendants. So there's this sub-segment within the entire tribe of Levi that were known as just the priests. So Moses actually was a priest and a king to the people before they even reached Mount Sinai. And Aaron and his priests, the whole Aaronic priesthood, wasn't even in existence until they reached Mount Sinai and God created the Aaronic priesthood. So before they reached Mount Sinai, there was no such thing as the Aaronic priesthood. But yet Moses is serving as the king and the priest of the Israelites at that point, before they even reached Mount Sinai. So he was a priest of some kind, but he wasn't a Levitical / Aaronic priest. He was also their king. So a king and a priest would indicate that he would have been a Melchizedek priest. Yeah.
Okay.
Trust me, it is a higher honor for him to be a Melchizedek priest than to be an Aaronic priest. because we're going to find out that the Aaronic priesthood was plan B. It was plan B it wasn't the best priesthood. We have a priesthood that's built on better promises, and that's the Melchizedek priesthood. So trust me, you want to be a Melchizedek priest. All right. Did I lose anybody? Did anybody have any other questions? Nope.
No, this was fantastic. I'm looking forward to part 2.
Did my folks get anything more out of it? Did it kind of sink in a little bit more? I know you guys have heard it several times at this point. I'm seeing Linda Carter shaking her head a little bit. All right. Okay. Well, if no other questions, maybe we'll go ahead and stop the recording. Thank you for coming. I hope you'll see you next week.